Your name again is?
I was born Sandy Bergen, November 15, 1959, in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And there was an Air Force base less than 5 miles away from that hospital. And I was taken back to the hospital when I was 3 years old. My mother put me in a blanket. I was not sick that morning, and she wrapped me in a blanket and rocked me in her arms and took me to the hospital, and they put me in a cage. And I always remembered it as what I thought was 3 to 4 days, but through the extensive therapy, I know it was much longer. And I never forgot a lot of parts of that hospital stay, and other ones started flashing back when I had what I call my awakening in December of 2012, when it was like a bag was taken off my head and I was being led to information and websites and books, and I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together of the horrible childhood that I had with all of the sexual abuse and the hospital stay, which I'd like to describe. The hospital stay, that would have been in about 1969. I was about 3 years old. I was put in a cage. There was never any vitals taken. Other children were in the cages around me. And we were let out of the cages to go in the play corner to play with blocks and puzzles and numbers. And the only visit from my parents in those days that I was there was when they came and they brought me puzzles. And I sat in that cage and I solved them 1, 2, 3. And that's what the brain is prepared for, the fragmentation through the puzzles and symbols, and they put the commands in. And I remember a nurse that I asked there was a door behind my cage, and I asked the nurse who was in that room, and she said a girl with a hole in her heart. And I remember not being able to eat. I was extremely depressed. They took me out of, one of the tests I've never forgotten is they took me out of the cage and wheeled me down a hall. There was another child brought out of the room, and I was brought into the room by what I always, even at that age, I thought they were very humanoid looking, a male and female. And they put me on the table, and they didn't put anything for lead or if they were x-raying. And they stepped out of the room and looked through a triangle in the wall and put their heads together and said, "Smile," and zapped me right in the chakra area. And through learning about the program, they very well could have attached an entity to me right then, or they definitely altered my intuition chakra or stimulated my sexual chakra, because I was overly sexual my entire childhood. After the hospital stay, I would have earaches, and my mom would put drops in my ears, and one drop set would burn and one would tickle. And I would say they implanted me at the same time. Right after the hospital stay, my cousin was spending the night. He's about my age or a year younger than me, actually. And I was very excited. My cousin was spending the night, and they put him in bed with me. And I remember the first time I woke up, and it was a rough hand fondling me. And I remember thinking it felt good and it felt familiar. And through now my expensive therapy, I've seen that they sexually abused me. It would wake me up in the cage just like that. And I remember my eyes popping open, and I was like, "Ooh, this feels good." And it did feel familiar, and it went on for years. By the time I was 6, 7 years old, I knew my cousin's penis. I mean, we were having all kinds of sexual night after night. My brother, 3 years older than me, molested me most of my childhood, and I had blocked that out. And then I started remembering, and I called my brother and I said, "Do you remember when you undressed me in Mom and Dad's bed?" And he goes, "Oh no, that was in the tent." And then boom, I had probably 20 incidences that I started remembering that I had blocked out. And my brother always through my childhood would call me names and sing songs, fat songs about me. And I had no self-esteem time I was an adult. And I remember when I was in 2nd grade, so Anna, you asked me what 2nd grade would have been, 6, 7 years old, and I was down the street, and I was in bed naked with a boy 3 years older than me, and he was trying to put his penis in my butt, and his mom opened the door, stormed open the door, and I remember being embarrassed and disappointed because that's what I thought I was. And I would be triggered to go through drawers as a child, and I went in my dad's drawer, and right on top was a big, I was probably 7 years old, was a big, thick pornography book with graphic cartoons, with, you know, grandpa with granddaughter and sex with animals. And that was my go-to toy as a child. I probably learned to masturbate when I was 9 years old, and did pretty disgusting things that a child should never have done. And I'm pretty sure that they suck off at your sexual energy. And my first husband, and so that's mostly the childhood that I had, was always having the sexual. And that was my second cousin. The parents are the first cousins. And Sharon, I called her the Madame. I think she's Madame. She took us on a tour of the Ford factory, her and her sons, myself and her sons, and it was a private tour. And we went in a side door, and they had us stop and look this way and look that way. And from reading what Kathy O'Brien said, that the perpetrators of this like to see their victims out of the bedroom scene. And I realized that my first cousin, Rich, ended up working for Ford's. The cousin that I had all that sex with works for Ford's now, and the Fords are big in Michigan, and I'm pretty sure that they supported this program, this nefarious program.
You're talking about the Ford Motor Company?
Gerald Ford went right to Kathy O'Brien's house.
Oh,
when she
Fords,
was
the presidential. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And I ended up getting married and having a daughter. And my husband was killed in a car accident when my daughter was 1 year old. And I ended up with this 6'4", blonde hair, blue eyed, I would call him probably a Nordic, who talked to me, got me on drugs, started traveling around the States, talked me into having my daughter stay with my parents, and I would go back and forth to see my daughter. One time I went 9 times in a year. From New York to Michigan. And I counted, I was in New York City for about 16 years. I probably traveled at least 40 times between New York and Michigan. And the best meal, because I'm sure I was carteling from the handler that I had there, and my brother and my parents were probably contacts in Michigan. I went at least 40 times, drove. And the best meal is one that doesn't know they have anything, doesn't have to be paid, and pays for the trip. And I lived it. And like I said, I just put the pieces of the puzzle together starting in December of 2012. And nothing makes me happier than to expose this, because it's generational. And I have 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters. And I'm not even allowed to talk to my granddaughters. I haven't seen them since October of last year, because they don't want me to talk about this. They basically don't believe me. My oldest daughter has even the butterfly tattoo on her shoulder, and I think that there's people that do agree to the project, which I would never have agreed to this.
You're referring to monarch? You're referring to a monarch butterfly? She
has the monarch butterfly on her shoulder. And I've asked her to please.
Is the left shoulder here?
Mm-hmm. I believe it's the left one. It could be the right, but I asked her why she got that, and she said she doesn't know. But my grandbaby's dad has told me he's a Mason, and when they got angry at me, he texted me and said, "There's a much worse fate for you. You're not going to the one. You should have paid attention to your gifts." And I'm like, oh, now that was total Mason line. You should have paid attention to your gifts. And I realized that the Masons have been involved in my life. I ended up working as a legal secretary for 25 to 30 years and didn't realize that the Bar Association fees that I paid for them went right to the Crown, which is the Templars, which is the Masons. And they probably had a part of the mind control. I never even put the word Masons into my vocabulary until 2012. And throughout my life, I was always with these handlers that got me on drugs. And it was always weird to me that all of these law firms I worked at never did a drug test, ever. And so I was always on something.
Now, in the United States, is it a law that people do drug tests?
Most employments have drug tests, but the law firms they never did a drug test, which, I thought that that's...
broadcasting and other employees?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Or if you work in the factories or anywhere, it's always a drug test. Almost everywhere has drug tests now. But the law firms didn't, and I think that was kind of convenient to keep me, because if they kept me high and distracted, I wasn't going to figure this out. And I haven't done hard drugs in 8 years now, and I had deep regret over it because of the guilt.
What would you call hard drugs?
Crack, heroin. I did it all. And for some reason, I was able to function. Maybe I did heroin back when I was 21 years old, but then through the years, I did coke. And then I did some crack on and off for 7 years. And I had no intervention. My daughters had to have known. I have my oldest daughter is 35, my middle daughter is 25, and my youngest is 23. My crack thing went on and off for 7 years. And that was from 2004 to 7 years would be 2011. Well, now I had quit that before, I think my last time ever used, and it was about 2008. But I never had an intervention. I'm lucky I got off of it. And I was never proud of it. But I realized that's the part they probably were using experience. Because they watch everything you do. The whole program is from cradle to grave. It's from cradle to grave. My last house that I just sold had cameras on me. They had surveillance lights across the property. I would have people come over for fires, and I would say, okay, it's getting dark. Look over there, over there, over there, and over there. There'd be lights peering through the woods right at me. Because they knew I was going to wake up in December of 2012. So that property was already set up for me to buy. And the mind control is huge. I was mind controlled to... I was widowed when my daughter was 1 year old, and then I was married and divorced 3 times. And one of the husbands actually we put a black and white floor in our kitchen. He had owl lamps. He abused me. He cheated on me. He beat me, and he was a Mason. And I didn't even put it together until I started having all of this. Kind of like spiritual guidance where revelations would come to me and I'd start putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
What kind of revelation?
Oh, like my first husband was killed by the Masons because actually what happened is I went through a big trauma. My daughter was 1 year old. We had only been married a couple years, and he molested my niece. And there was never any charges brought against him. He was mysteriously killed in the car accident 3 months later. And and my niece's uncle, I was led to information that he's a Mason, and his father's first name was even Mason. And I had no clue. I didn't put any of it together. I should have realized that accident, because he was driving, and if he was going in the direction that the police report said, he should have crashed on the other side, but he probably was pushed off the road and his car was wrapped around a tree. And I've had spiritual contact actually too, which I think is a byproduct of the electroshock, because they do fragment your mind and put compartments in. And I've always had these marks on my temples. Even as I used to look, and as a kid, what is that? It says they put something on my head. Through therapy, I was able to see something attached to my head and then wiping drool off of my mouth. And then the byproduct is always the moles. I've always had these moles on my face and on my back and stuff from the electroshock.
Is that scars when they burn in or what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always had, and it's gotten more prominent as I've gotten older. And I've told my sister, she's like, Oh, Sandy, she admits that I was in the hospital. She's like, well, it was for a bladder infection. I said, I had no infection. I wasn't sick. I went to the bathroom, and it appeared, I had no fever, no pain. I know what a bladder infection is, my daughters have had them. They had pain urinating. And I went to flush, and it appeared red. Through meditation, I'm pretty sure they gave me something to drink the night before. Because I remembered, through meditation, I was able to even see my mother stimulating my clitoris when she was changing my diaper. And my brother was in my crib when I was like 1 year old. He's 3 years older than me, playing with me sexually. And I was bred for it. And I always thought that was like our secret. I never told anybody anything. And through my 4th grade, 5th grade, we would have recesses, and there would be always groups of girls and boys that we thought we were hiding from the teacher's aides. I mean, it was like Brave New World's childhood, where we would all go together and start kissing and fondling, and it went on for 2 years without one teacher's aide ever interrupting us. And there was all of this making out, we're switching boys and girls. It was just like this little sex party every recess. And where was the teachers?
Did they see you doing this?
We thought they were hiding. We always, they had to have seen us. And in my childhood, they gave us a lot of hearing tests in that elementary. That elementary school is now tore down. And the hospital that I was at, because I wanted to get the records, because of especially that one test. What did they do? What was it? And they destroy the records 25 years and older, conveniently. Because they knew what they were doing. And I truly believe that they know who's coming. We've been reincarnated before, and they know the type of person that I was already, and they manipulated my life.
What kind of person were you already? Why?
Oh, I would have... Probably in other lives, I was very righteous and honest, and I kind of get frustrated that I didn't have my awakening 20 years ago, because I would have quit my job and homeschooled my kids and not have vaccinated them, and went against. I do hate the government very much, and they're supplying war military when there's people starving to death. It's just ridiculous, right?
So what sort of help have you had since your awakening? Have you sought help, or have you sought any sort of compensation for what you've suffered?
I was thinking that, wow, if all of us slaves got together and did a class act against the government, we could obviously get some money, but I would want to do it for the publicity more than anything. I was a legal secretary, and a workaholic legal secretary for 25 years. I worked massive overtime, and I am on Social Security disability now. And as long as they leave my disability alone, I don't care about money anymore. I just want this program to be revealed, that the CIA is capable of doing this, and that the Masons are not good. They're not. They hurt their own children. And what happened with my last altar that kicked in? I was always a Christian. Somehow I prayed as a little baby. I had my prayers down. At the very end, I would say, "And forgive my enemies, for they know not what they do." Who taught me that? I don't know. And I was confirmed Lutheran. I went to catechism for 3 years. I used to wear my little Christian cross and go on Bible study on lunch hour. Got rebaptized as an adult at a place called Brooklyn Tabernacle in New York City. And always would read the proverb every day and read. Well, when my last altar kicked in December 2012, I could not stop reading the Bible for 8 to 10 hours a day, every day. Every day. I mean, I went right back to the beginning, because I was reading the Psalms, and they're crying out, "I know your commandments, I know your precepts, I know your testimony." So I was like, let me go back. And I read it cover to cover many times. I still, to this day, I'm surprised I didn't bring my Bible, because I've given myself a break. But I learned a lot. And
what did you learn?
Well, the Sabbath is the worship day. If you know that Bible, The Sabbath is the fourth commandment, and it was very important from the beginning of the book. He has chapters in Isaiah and Ezekiel of his people Sabbath breaking. He has the blessings of keeping it. He said that he is God, or Yahuwah. I call him Yahuwah. I am Yahuwah. I do not change. That's in Malachi 3:6. So he doesn't change. He's not going to change his worship day. And then Jesus Christ, Yahushua, even in Luke 4:16, he went to Nazareth on the Sabbath. He went to Nazareth and went to the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his habit. And some Bibles say as was his custom. So his custom when he walked this planet was to worship on the Sabbath. And there's a lot of arguments in the New Testament about him doing the miracles on the Sabbath and stuff, and you shouldn't do that. And the Sabbath is the worship day. He never said to change the Father's commandments. He said to honor them. And then I read the whole cover to cover, and I was reading the disciples who was chosen as the apostles, and that one apostle was chosen by Jesus Christ as Paul. Judas Iscariot was replaced by Matthias, and Paul was a self-proclaimed apostle, and he wrote 13 of the books in the New Testament, and starts almost all of them out with I, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. Well, he wasn't chosen by Jesus Christ. He had his little miracle where supposedly he was spoken to. And in the back of Revelations, it says that when there's a new world and a new heaven, and there'll be 12 foundations and 12 gates. And then the 12 gates will be the 12 names of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. And on the foundations, it goes either one is the gates and one is the foundation, will be the names of the 12 chosen by the Lamb, the 12 apostles, the 12 disciples chosen by the Lamb. Paul was not chosen by the Lamb. He's not one of the 12. And he's the one who said, don't let any man tell you what the Sabbath is. That wasn't, because the New Testament will have words of Jesus Christ, and it's usually in red in the King James. And Paul was the one who said, don't let any man tell you what the Sabbath is, tell you what to eat. And Paul's has some good stuff. He said, we're not going against flesh and blood. We're going against principalities and spirits in high places. That was Paul. It's not like I just think Christianity, that if they put the Christianity mind control net in, that it should all be questioned. I mean, the Catholic Church does idolatry. They worship Mary and Paul, and if you follow the Bible, he's one God. And also, I noticed there was references to aliens. The word aliens is in the Bible. And in Jeremiah and 2 times in Isaiah, there's a reference to a cockatrice. He says in Jeremiah, behold, I'll send serpents and cockatrices among you, and they will not be charmed. Well, I Google, what's a cockatrice? Well, it's a reptile egg. And in Isaiah, he says, and they'll have wings and the whole, and I'm like, it's right there in the Bible. And Sherry Schreiner is very advanced compared to me on that. And she has a great website that she talks candidly about the aliens and how it's in the Bible. And, the dragons that's referred to in the Bible is reference to these different beings.
You said you met aliens.
Mm-hmm.
What type, when?
Well, so I had one of my last husbands. I was mind controlled to. I met a man from Alabama. Right before I met him, though, I had a friend who said, "Oh, do you want to make an easy $100? All you have to do is go to this beautiful hotel and sit and listen to songs for 3 hours." And guess who did it? I know. I did do that, and I'm sure that they triggered me because I met him, and immediately I was totally infatuated, and he had me move to Alabama. And while I was there, a man at the flea market was following me, and I looked again, and he shapeshifted right in front of my eyes. His eyes turned yellow, his hair changed, his whole everything changed. And
would you be able to find drawings of these things?
perhaps. And I also, at my home just last year, I was laying in bed and I was, because I was like, they're here. And it was two grays got up my bottom of my feet and one got on my chest and they zapped me right in my temple.
Can you describe them?
They looked pretty much with the big eyes
Any
and
further details? It's important.
What colour?
High or tall? Or what?
they were short. They were the small ones, and they were a gray color. They had the gray color. They had the big eyes, and
I
then
mean, were they almond, up, down, sideways, eat?
they were round. So maybe they. Sometimes they can send in
Oh, it's just to get some kind of description. There's
right.
different types of greys.
There is. There's the tall grays. There's the short. There's many species out there, and most people think that I'm crazy because I've seen ships. I
Can
have.
you describe them?
Well, at my house, I showed Zen Gardner this picture that I'm going to email him because he's like, "Wow, Sandy." I was doing my dishes and looking over the woods, and there's a poof coming up from the bottom, like a mushroom.
Yeah.
And then I got my camera and I took the picture, and above it there was 8 orbs, 8 lights, and you could see the outline of a ship. And I showed couple people this weekend, and they're like, I said, I got it. And then I was with my binoculars looking up in the sky, and I saw a ship hovering, going up and down, up and down. And I was with my last handler, and he never wanted. For instance, if I was listening to David Icke, to be learning, listening to, he was like, you have to use headphones. He didn't want anything to do with my awakening and helping me. So he moved out last year in June, and I've chosen now to have to live by myself because I've had at least 14 handlers. I was married and divorced 3 times, widowed, and in between I had 2 years with this one, 3 years with another one, and they just passed me along, and they were all predators. None of them were good. They stole from me. They cheated me. I used to get beatings. My last beating was in 2010, and from this George who came in my life. They pretend that you're the greatest thing in the whole world. As soon as they meet you, they're like, "Oh, I'm in love with you," and I would fall for it. And then they would start doing these horrible things to me, and and I'm sure it's to suck up my energy to keep my vibration down. And with that hovering ship, I had to go in. I said, "Brian, please, would you come out and look at this?" And he's like, "Okay." And he stood there for 5 minutes, and he's like, "Okay." I go, "Do you see what I'm talking about?" He said, "Yeah, I see it, but I don't understand it." I said, "Well, at least you see it. I'm not going crazy because it's been hovering there for a half hour before I had the nerve to come in and ask you to please come and look."
Can you give any descriptions of what you're seeing?
Oh, this hovering thing, it had windows, it had lights, and it was... I guess oval, and it was going up and down, and I think it stayed there after he went in, and I stood there, and then finally it flew off.
Did it make a sound?
No, there's no sound. And where I'm at up north, I'm up in the country, and I would go out at night, and I would notice things flying over with no sound. They're very, and what I captured with the poof and stuff, I've already heard that they can send up holograms to cover up their ships, and I'm pretty sure that's what that poof was coming up first. Then the ship came out, and I even drove, because it was at least 2 miles away where that was coming off, and I will show it to you. And it looked like you can't see the inside of this place where, because the way it gets built up, they have a lot of hidden bases, that we think are trees or it may be like what you might call a compound where there's like vehicles parked all over and they have this weird fencing and stuff, and then when you look on the satellite it's like, wow, that's because that's what happened over there 3 miles from my house. I'd go by this place and I said that's I would get this vibe. So I went on Google Earth and looked inside it, and it was like a military base in there. but they had it looking just like it was, you know, tractor, campers and like hobo land.
Yeah.
But inside you could see the lights and the different things and I said, well, that shows you that people, they're very good at what they do. We have to remember that we've been deceived by the best, and they're not going to tell you what they're doing. So I just been doing my own research, and like I said, I had the Alabama shapeshifter, which my husband had said, we're going to the flea market tomorrow. And I said, great, I like that flea market. We had gone a couple times before. When we got there, I noticed there was nobody there but these tall, dark men standing 3 in one corner, 2 in another corner. And then I was walking, and that old man was following me. And then I turned and looked again, and boom, it was just like a Stephen King book. His whole... And he changed right in front of my eyes.
Into what?
Into like a demon's face. He had yellow eyes. The eyes turned yellow. I'll never forget it. And he had horns came
When
up.
you said the eyes, the whole eyes.
The eyes went like a demon's eyes. Right to, yeah, they went sideways. And he had horns come up, and as the hair
How
flamed.
many horns?
Two.
Yeah.
Two horns came up, and I immediately made a full circle around, and I grabbed my husband's hand, and he was giggling, so I know that he knew. He was like giggling, and I turned, and these dark men were all standing around me, and at the time I thought they were breathing down my neck, but now I know they were sucking up my energy because I was startled. I was like, time we got out of that flea market, I had tears in my eyes because it was just so real. And then the men just all